Okay, so our first presenter is Wilkinson. He's a freelance WordPress developer and a secondary school teacher. He's been using WordPress for over 7 years now, building sites, bespoke themes and plugins. So he's a really good person to have an answer to and learn a bit about his processes and things. So I'll hand you over.
Good evening.
Evening.
I'm here today to talk to you about local staging to live using version control and deployment tools. Just have a show of hands, how many people are developers? Good. Designers? Users? Not sure? Just gives us an idea of who we're talking to, obviously. As you said, this talk was given in WordCamp Warner, which was July, I think. So this is a version of that talk, slightly different, but got the same theme. So I don't know if anyone was there, but you might have already heard this. That was me presenting in Warner. So I'm Mark Wilkinson. I'm from Leyland in Lancashire. You might tell from the accent. Near Preston. And so just to tell you just about myself. I'm a father, so these are my two children. That's Harry on the right and James on the left, and they're the reason why I'm staying over tonight. No, I wouldn't listen to the world, but nice to have a break. I'm also, as Harry said, I'm a teacher. I used to teach full-time. I taught for 12 years in secondary school, first of all teaching geography, and then I moved over to teach ICT and computing. I actually quit that in April, and I now only teach for one day, and I'm a freelance WordPress developer for the rest of the time. I build all sorts of different sites, mainly for medium to small size businesses, doing lots of bespoke plugins and themes and all sorts really, a bit of WooCommerce and e-commerce and things like that. So quite a varied stuff I build. Anyone know which version of WordPress that is?
2.9?
Way earlier than that.
1.6.
A bit later than that. It's actually WordPress 2, and that's how long I've been using WordPress. That's quite scary. That's back in 2005. It was when I first started looking at using it. I didn't really build anything for anybody at that time, but that's the first dashboard that I ever saw. It's quite interesting to look at that now, what it used to be like. So I've been using WordPress a long time, and I'm going to talk to you today about the following. So I'm going to look at perhaps what your current development setup is. How do you currently build a site for a client or whoever it is? I'm going to talk to you about developing locally on your computer. So building sites not on a server, but on your machine, your laptop, whatever you use. Talk about how to use version control briefly, and what that is, if you're not sure. Why you should use a staging and a production site, not a product site. And talk about deployments, how you should be getting those files, etc., to the server, and why it's a good thing. So, how many people use FTP to get files to their site? I must admit I do sometimes as well. And FTP is great, it stands for File Transfer Protocol. You probably use a client like FileZilla or something like that to move your files from your machine onto the server, and then the server can obviously serve WordPress pages. And it works really good. And for years and years and years, I was using sites doing FTP, using that methodology. So you take the file, you edit it, you push it up to the server with FTP, you refresh your page, and you see how it works. And that worked for a while. And to illustrate the problem with that, I've got a series of pictures. This is actually in Scotland. It's a harbour in Scotland. And as you can see, some unfortunate, it's like a Fiesta driver, has tipped the car into the harbour. So what do they do? Well, we go and get the local person to get down. Excellent, good, we've got over the car. Everything's going smoothly. You know what happens next? So in goes the lorry. Oh dear, we've got a problem. So what do we do? It's fine. Just we worked this way for a while. It's good. So we bring another lorry, and lo and behold, out comes the car. That's great. We've got that out. Lovely. We've got another lorry in the water now. So what we're going to do with that one? Well, we'll get this lorry and see that. So the point with that is, you keep doing the same thing in the same way, and you get the same results. And FTP was the same for me. It was working wonderfully. There was nothing wrong with it or soft thoughts, but actually there was lots of other opportunities if you were willing to give something else a go. And it's those other opportunities that I want to talk to you about tonight, and maybe how you can do things slightly differently to get yourself a better result. So let's start off with your setup. So, and more importantly, your local setup. So local, by that I mean on your computer, your laptop, your desktop, whatever you build your websites on. So obviously I use a Mac, and this talk is going to be based solely around the Mac. I'm sorry for those Windows users. There are similar tools though for Windows users that do pretty much the same thing. But obviously as I use Mac, I'll be focusing on that. So the first stage when you're building a site is to get the whole site running on your machine. The database, the files, everything. So you've got the whole thing running on your machine. Got a train down here today, and on the train I was able to build sites without any internet connection because the whole site was running on my laptop. And that's the best thing to do. It has lots of benefits. Speed is the main thing. It's really quick because it doesn't have to go to the internet to get anything. Okay? You're not serving pages from the internet, you're serving them from your own machine. So speed is really good for local development. So it's strongly advocate it. How do we do it? Well, most WordPress sites, and not all these days, there are lots of other opportunities, but perhaps traditionally they've run on what's called LAMP stack. So LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL and PHP, which are the things that we need to run WordPress. We need PHP to run in PHP, we need MySQL for the database to run, and the web server is often Apache. There are different options. I build sites on Windows servers and other ones, but Apache is perhaps the most popular, and obviously that runs on the operating system of Linux. So we need to get this onto our local machine so that we can build sites on our machine. And to do that, there is a tool called mamp. Is anybody running mamp? Excellent. Good. Halfway there. For Windows, there is what we call WAMP, and also XAMPP, I think there's another one that's called XAMPP, it's called. And they do the similar things to what this tool does. And obviously, all MAMP stands for is Mac, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Now, all Macs come with these things, an Apache server on them anyway, but this just sort of packages it up into one package and you just double click an installer and it installs it for you. So it's much easier to work with than it is with sort of the command line and having to mess about that sort of thing. So strongly have a go at using MAMP. They do a pro version as well, which allows you to do things like having your own local domain names and things. You can actually do most of it if you know the commands to do it. I don't have a pro version, I just use the standard free version. And it's free to download. I think it's mamp.info on the internet, just search mamp and it'll come up. And that allows you to get going on your local machine. So it gives you PHP-MyAdmin, so you can create your databases and connect. It gives you a MySQL server so that you can obviously run those databases. It gives you Apache, which is your web server. So you can actually run a WordPress site locally, which is a good thing. So we've got ourselves set up locally. We've got a database set up. We've got all our files ready. We've got WordPress running on our machine. The next thing that I really strongly suggest that you try and use is version control. The flavour of version control that I use is Git, particularly using GitHub, which is an online service for managing your Git repositories. There is another one called Bitbucket, which is Git's hosted version. People tell me about that because it's free. You can have like private repositories that are free, which you can't on GitHub, you have to pay for it. But I like the way GitHub works, so I use GitHub. So what is version control? Well, the main reason why you should use it is it tracks the changes that you make to any file that you put in version control. So we've probably all had the experience whereby the client brings us up and says, do X, Y, and Z, please, I like this changing. So you do it, and I spend 2 or 3 hours doing it. And then you show the client, and the client says, no, don't like that. Put it back to how it was, please. So you then stuck, like, well, do I spend 2 or 3 hours putting it back again? Well, if you used version control, you wouldn't have to do any of that, because it keeps a version history of every file that you've changed. And all you have to do is press the button to revert it back to the time that you had before you started making those changes. And you save yourself a lot of time. It's also really good for if you're building projects with multiple people, with multiple developers, and they can contribute and work on the same code at the same time, committing that code, and we can track who's changed what, from when, from why, and it's really good. GitHub also has things like issue trackers and things like that, which I think GitHub does as well, but I've not used it, so that you can track what issues arose, how you fix them, which particular pieces of code fix the issue, so therefore it doesn't work in the future, you can track changes back to that, and it's really a really good tool to use. It can be a bit daunting at first, but persevere with it, have a play with it, and use it. It's really, really good. I don't know how I did use it now. I started using it, it was about 12, 18 months. Really recommend it. So, here's how I would normally set up my projects. This is the sort of the workflow, if you like, how it would work. I would have all of my code for the project in a GitHub repository, which is obviously up in the cloud. And I'd have the website on my local machine running. And every time I wanted to make a change, that's the code that I would be changing on my local machine. I'd have a staging server and a production server, or should I say site. So the reason why we have these two, the staging server is somewhere where you can test your code on the same site as the live site that's running, on the same environment. So ideally it should be on the same server or the server with the same specification. So for example, you may have an issue with PHP where you've written something in PHP and one server using an older version so it won't work. Having these staging and production environments will catch that error before it goes live, and then you can correct it. It also allows your clients to see your site before it goes live, so they can have access to log into the staging site and see things that you've done, things that they've requested perhaps. And it's just a live copy really of the live site. And then obviously the production is the live site that's out there to the public and anyone can see it and so on. So that's the sort of setup. And I suppose these yellow arrows are the key points, how we get from local to the repository, from repository to the staging, and from the repository to the live site. So I'm going to talk to you about the tools that I use. The first one is GitHub for Mac, which is a GUI interface for Git, really, and it allows you to connect to GitHub, which is where the code's stored. So what happens is when you set up your project, in here, you basically, as soon as you change your file, it appears in a list on this little interface and it says this file's been changed. And once you're happy with the change and you know it works, you would commit it. And that means it would be committed to your local machine's repository as a change that's successful, if you like, and you can give it a commit message to tell you what you did and why you did it. And you can then sync that with GitHub, so put it up into the cloud if you like up here, and that's how we get the code from your machine up into the cloud, up into the GitHub repository. And this is like the central store for all your code. So if you have other people collaborating with you, they would have the same sort of setup, And then when you wanted to make a change, you'd pull commits down from here to your machine so that you've got the latest version of the code, which is why it's really good for working in a team. So that's how we get from local to the repository. We've then got to get that code that's in that repository to live and staging sites. We've got to push that down. And we do this using a deployment tool. We don't use FTP. And what the deployment tool is it connects to our GitHub repository, and it can see any of the commits that you've made, and it can commit any of those, it can deploy or publish or send out any of those commits to either of these servers. It can also do things like rolling back, so if something didn't work, you can easily log back into your deployment tool and say, no, I'll just push out the last commit before that one, because that one broke it, so I'll just push the last one out. So again, it's really good if you've got problems and you need to roll back to the last version. This does it. I use a tool called Deploy HQ, which was one that I saw mentioned in the talk. I had a go with it and I liked it. There are quite a few out there. After the talk with Birmingham, there was quite a few people mentioned other tools that they'd use. It's an online tool, and you just create an account. I think they have a free version where you can do one project and you can do 10 deploys a day. But if you want to do more than that, you need to pay, I think it's $6 for 10 projects, so it's not very much. Well worth it. And the interface looks like this. So you set up a site and you tell it your staging server and your live server, and you give it the connection details for those, SSH or SFTP. And here you can see that I've set up two servers, a production and a staging. So I choose which server I want to push the code to. And in here, at the bottom here, I can tell it which commit codes that I want to actually push in. The one at the top was the last one that was pushed to the server. The one at the bottom is the latest commit on GitHub. But I can go to GitHub and I can copy any of those commit codes and paste them into those boxes, and it will push that commit to the server. So I could roll back to 2 years ago if I wanted to, just by going to find that commit from 2 years ago and putting the code into that box. And obviously here, run deploy is when your nerves start to go and the live site obviously, and you hope it works. And it just runs through and publishes all the files. And it knows what was on the server, what's changed from last time, and it can push out the files that have changed only from the previous version, which is why you can roll back and so forth. So that's the sort of development flow that I use, but there are one or two problems that we come up against when we're using WordPress. So we've got a few hurdles to get over. The sorts of decisions as to, well, do we put everything in version control, our entire WordPress site? Do we just put our theme? Do we put the content folder, WP content folder, which has got our themes and plugins? So we've got to get over some of these hurdles. I'm a fan of putting everything in version control. I think the more you put in, the better. Keep everything in version control, so you know if you've updated WordPress, you can roll back and so forth. But one of the hurdles we sort of come across is this file. You're not sure what this file is. It's the WP config, which is where you set up your connection to your database. So it has the username, database name, password, and other things like the prefix key tables, and you can put other stuff in there as well. But obviously, if we put this under version control, our local site won't work because the database connection details for working on our computer will be different to those on the production site, and it will be different to those on the staging site. So if I was to commit this, it would grab the database details in from our local machine, I would then push it out to the server, and the site would just show error connection to database can't work because it can't connect. So how do we get across this? Well, in our WP config file, the way I do it is this. So I have an if statement at the top that basically says, if I have a file in the root of my project called local-config, I want you to include it. So load it. And in there is where I put the database details for my local machine. If it doesn't have that, then it will just come to this else statement, And in here is where the normal WP config database connection details go. So obviously on the live site, we wouldn't have this local-config file, so the server would just look in here and it would connect to our database correctly. But that kind of still gives us a problem because we really want the WP config under version control, but we also want this file under version control because if it's in our repository, then it will be under version control. So this is where this file comes in, called git ignore. And what this allows you to do is to select any file in your repository to say, ignore it. I don't want you to track this file, I don't want you to track the changes, just leave it alone, I'm not interested. So in our git ignore file, we would put in these two bits. So first of all, I've got the local config file in there, to tell Git to ignore it. Don't put it under version control, just ignore it. And I also put in the WP content / uploads folder, because I don't want all the media that people upload to be under version control, all the files, the images, you know, they could be gigabytes worth. I'm not really bothered about those being under version control. They're not really essential for development. If an image doesn't load on the local machine, I'm not really bothered. It's not going to affect the way I work, so it's not a problem. You can also put the .htaccess file in if you're on a Linux server. You might have different rules locally than you would have on the server, so you could put that in. In fact, GitHub gives you a git ignore file that you can use, which has a lot of other ones in as well, but I tend to just stick with those. So that enables us to work with those three different environments, local, staging and live, with everything under version control and it working really well. And what that also means is that if you've got another person working on your project, all they've got to do is download the repository, create a database on their local machine, create a local-config file with the connection to that database, and they're running with the same file system. It doesn't affect the server or the staging server. So, we've got a local setup. We've talked about how to get files to and from the site. So, we need to set up our staging and production sites. As I said, the reason why we have a staging site is so we can catch things that may be different from our local machine, any server things that are different. The most common one I've dealt with where the server runs a different version of PHP that's out of your control. So you might have coded something on your local machine that works really well in PHP, but on the live site, because it's an old version of PHP, it just wasn't running as an error. This would catch that because they're on the same server, or the same server with the same setup. And obviously production is the live site, the site that the client sees and the public see. So, if you're not using a staging server, I would recommend you do. Don't just go from local to live, because there is a risk of when you press the deploy button, you know, something may break, because you can't be too sure that your environment on your machine is going to be exactly the same as the environment on the server. So I'd recommend setting up a staging site. It allows you to test things, clients can see things, okay things, before they go live. I just usually use staging.domain.com as the domain for that. So it's on the same site, same server. And then what I used to do is use a plugin called Registered Users Only, really simple plugin. So basically hide it for login users only. And you can just add that to that site so that no one else can see those changes. And one thing to remember with your staging server as well is use the robots.txt file, which is what Google uses to index your site, and make sure it's set to no index. Otherwise you'll have two identical sites, and Google will not like that, and you'll end up getting no ranking from Google because two sites are exactly the same. So use the robots.txt file to say no index from all the bots that come to look at it. It's not on the live site. One of the other hurdles we have is the database. None of this affects the database. So Git, version control, they don't do anything with the database. It's only the files that make up your site. So there's a couple of options you have. There's a couple of plugins that you can do which will sync the database. One of them's called WP Migrate Pro. I think it's about $50 odd. It's quite good. or you can just import the database and export the database. I actually find that you don't really need to sync the databases though, because when you're developing, let's say the client wants to change, they want a new page template making, they want to change to one of the template files, it doesn't really matter that you don't have the live database. You don't need the latest news post to be there to make that change. You don't need all the pages that are on the live site. So it doesn't really matter that the databases aren't, the same. Sometimes, like every 3 or 4 months, I'll just grab a copy from the live site and put it down to my local machine and do a find and replace on the URL if it becomes a problem. But it's not essential for everyday sort of development and working, so I wouldn't bother worrying about the database too much. Obviously, the first time you launch the site, you want to make a copy of your local database and put it on the staging site, and then do the same when the site goes live. But once that happens, if the databases become out of sync, it doesn't really affect you too much. But like I said, there are some tools if it does and you find it to be a problem. So let's just have a recap what we talked about. So if you can, develop locally. That's really important. It's nice and quick. Means your development's much faster. There's all sorts of other tools I can talk about for developing locally that will make you speed up, but I think that's for another talk. Do you develop using version control? Have a go with it, have a play with it if you've not had a go with it. As I said, it's sometimes a bit daunting to start with, but it's worth persevering and trying to get it to work. It gives you lots of benefits. Try and not use FTP. It's quite reliable at times. Sometimes you're not integrated to the live site or the local site. So please try and use a deployment option if you're out there. Use a staging site, set it up. If you've got a website already, they're free usually, just get a subdomain, add it on, create your staging site, let the client see things, catch any bugs before they go live. Then, obviously once you're happy everything's working, you can deploy that to your live site or your production site, and fingers crossed it all works. Still get nervous when I press that button to push the live ones, even using these tools. And your database is not that important when you're working. You don't have to have the correct version of your database, but if you do, then there are some tools that can help you. And that's right about it. Just one thing, I did talk to the guys at Deploy HQ, and they did offer a discount code for anyone who wants to take up that service. The discount's just mark Wilkinson in the checkout, and it will give you 3 months free, I think, I can't remember now, or 33 days for free trial instead of 10 days. So if you want to start with it, it's a bit cheaper for you. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, any questions? Yes.
I use mamp at the moment when I'm developing a local host, but I've got it synced into Dropbox, and I do that so I can work on various machines. But there's an issue with Dropbox when it syncs different files from different machines. It's got like its own version control. How would you work that into something like GitHub?
I've used Dropbox, and I've used it on several machines with success. Do you sync the database as well?
Yes.
Between your Dropbox accounts?
Yeah, that's the issue that I have. The files are okay, it's the database.
It's the database, is it? Well, like I said, I don't think that would be such an issue for me, because the database is not that important. It depends how, have you got a specific reason why the database is key to your workflow?
I suppose really because the client sites that I develop, they're full sites. It's not just the template files, it's the content as well that goes in. So the database is a big part of that.
Yeah, I suppose sometimes if you've got like a photo-heavy site, it might be important to have the pictures there or something, but it was quite tricky to set up. I had it working, but to be honest with you, I couldn't tell you why it wouldn't work, and I couldn't tell you why it did work, because it was quite a command line thing to set it up. So, and anyone else got on to start one?
As long as I know it works, I can play.
Can you repeat the question, please? Can you repeat the question?
So I use Dropbox or Google Drive or anything, so I've always got a cloud version, which I suppose you have in GitHub, but I like to have the Dropbox as well, database as well, so I can sync with the client work. But sometimes if you're using 2 different machines, there's like Dropbox has its own version control of the database. So if you're working on a laptop and a desktop, and you work on both of them simultaneously, it will have 2 different versions of the same database, and it causes a conflict. So I was just wondering if there was a version within GitHub that could use to Because GitHub's one of these things that I know there's a learning curve to it, and there's so many learning curves out there, you've got to draw a line.
Because
GitHub's one of the things that I never went for.
you used to have the dump of the database in Dropbox.
I still do. We'll have a chat afterwards if that's all right.
Yeah.
Jenny, you said you...
Yeah,
Yes, you
it's a bit of a shame, but Backup WordPress is a plugin that my company created, well, they maintain and stuff. It actually will sync up it backups web databases to wherever you want them to be, so you could back them up to Dropbox. That might be a solution as a workaround.
I did actually things like backup buddy at the moment. It's more having something that I don't have to click the button. I'm really lazy. The less buttons I can click, the better.
The other solution then would be to set up your mamp to actually serve from the same namespace. That would be a
Just
solution.
run a month.
Any questions? Yes.
Hi. I use CSS preprocessors like Less or SAS. I've always had a bit of an issue with what should I have under version control? Because I guess most people say it should be the less file or the CSS file and not the compiled file.
Yep.
If that's the case, when you go to deploy, that deployment script isn't going to know that the compiled file exists, so it won't compile. So I end up having to FTP my CSS after deployment.
Okay, I've not worked with Less or SAS. It's something I need on my list of things to learn, like I talked about saying. But yeah, my rule of thumb is I want to have as much under version control as possible.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure how obviously the compiled version gets created.
Yeah.
Does that happen locally or does it happen only on?
No, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
could you not have the CSS script file that was created in your version control as well?
Well, at the minute I've got everything under version control,
Okay.
but it's just apparently that's not best practice. And I can sort of see why.
Well, I would, but go on, Jenny.
Yeah.
We have everything on the version control,
Yeah.
like including SAS files and stuff,
Yeah.
but make sure that you have like your, the like SAS map actually set up so you can see the SAS map stuff.
Okay.
The only thing is with Git especially is that it'll just every time you change branch, it'll especially if you have like SAS watching on, it will automatically repopulate whatever SAS files just come onto the file because it's just like, oh, everything's switched. So when you're switching branches, try and make sure that you either unwatch it first, or you're like actually, just try and work in a particular branch with SAS files. Otherwise, you'll end up with little conflicts and stuff. But every time you get like a CSS conflict file, all I do is just with your SAS, just recompile the SAS to whatever you've got, and it'll fix it.
Okay.
Anyway, GitHub can have hooks exactly as WordPress.
Yeah.
So you can, every time that you do some actions on Git, with Git, you can recompile, you can move, you can delete, you can do whatever.
Yeah,
you want.
Any other questions? Just one thing I must add as well. GitHub is not like a backup solution, so please still back up your sites even though you use it. It's still important.
Okay, bro.
Thank you.